Hello and
Wait,
welcome to Reach.
Lena, we're not live yet.
Ah,
Please wait. Wait until the slide comes down and we'll be good to go.
hello and welcome to Reach Live. Thank you for joining us today for what will absolutely be another fantastic conversation with some fabulous people. It's my favorite thing to do at the end of each month. Reach Live takes place on the last Friday of every month. And thank you for being with us here today. I'd like to first introduce myself. I'm Reena Sangha. I'm the head of digital and connected health at Ipsos. Ipsos are a market research and insight agency, and we work in digital health, and we work on new solutions and look at the market. I have two wonderful people with me here today, Cherise and Joy, who are going to be giving you an introduction to who they are. The talk today is going to be centered around new innovations and new technologies. It'll be talking about gender. We'll be talking about inequity. So lots of interesting topics we're covering off today. So first I'll invite Cherise to come on and give herself an introduction and introduce you all to her.
Thank you. My name is Cherise Maynard. I am a digital health and policy specialist, and I've been in this field for over 15 years. I'm also the marketing person for Hit Like a Girl Pod, so I'm very, very happy to be here today.
Thanks so much. And Joy.
Hi, thank you for having us. My name is Joy Rios, and I have been working on the transition to value-based care for more than a decade and have founded the Hit Like a Girl podcast in 2018. So we've been on quite a few adventures over the last summer or so. But yeah, my passion has been in helping clinicians and doctors and their staff transition to going from a volume-based to a value-based system.
Fantastic. Well, today there's a lot to get through, as always, actually. But I think it's always interesting to know, how did you get involved in digital health? So tell us a little bit about your journey. Maybe Joy, you go first. Like, what brought you into this space?
Well, I didn't really realize that it was a family business. I mean, it wasn't something that I had been conscious of, but my uncle and father had been involved in digitizing health records on the island of Puerto Rico in the 80s and 90s. And so when I would go visit family, there was a lot of take your kid to work day, events. And I ended up just being a witness to, scanning boxes and boxes of Red Cross medical records into microfilm and microfiche. So it was sort of something, the digitizing of health is something that was in my language without even really being conscious of it. And then after I got my MBA, my uncle's business had actually transitioned from this, very tangible paper to smaller microfiche into an EHR. And so I came to go work with his organization to learn, why are EHRs important and what do they matter and why would somebody be transitioning? And it happened to be around the time that the HITECH Act had passed. And so I just really went down the rabbit hole of understanding meaningful use and kind of became a subject matter expert around, EHRs and their implementation, so that I could support practices into adopting them. And then it's just kind of grown from there.
Amazing. Cherise, how about you?
Okay, I think I always knew I would be in the healthcare field. I wasn't sure how that path was going to go, but I think I always knew my family. I come from a family of healthcare enthusiasts, I guess is the way to put it, doctors, nurses, and administrators, and all that loveliness. So I think I kind of knew early on. My first job in this business was involved with a small, well, it was small at the time, a small healthcare agency. And I did some interning with them, and then I kind of left and went on my way. And when I came back to them in pediatrics. And so that was my first real kind of devoted job in the space. I was in love with it, but what I found with that particular organization was that they weren't big on technology and innovation and that type of thing. So I took it as my personal goal to digitize them and get them into the innovation of healthcare IT and that type of thing. So it worked out pretty well. And that's how I started.
Oh, I just love hearing how people start and get involved. I mean, health is personal, health matters to us all. But to come in and try and solve for a problem is a fascinating thing. And it's so interesting to see kind of what's kind of brought that desire in for you guys. I mean, Hit Like a Girl, love the name, firstly. Who came up with that? Tell me the origin of that.
That would be me. I have a tendency to just think of like clever names. I mean, I have a consulting agency that's called Chirpy Bird, which is very unique in and of itself. And people say, where did that name come from? But it's a combination of my name and my business partner's name, where she's Robin and I'm Joy. And I thought, well, she's a bird and I'm a happy bird. So what would a happy bird do, right? It would chirp. So in the same, thought process as we were deciding to start a podcast, I thought, well, it's got to have a catchy name. And I knew that I wanted to focus on women. I knew that I wanted to give them a platform. And, the health IT acronym is HIT. And I just figured what a fun play on words. There did happen to be a drumming contest with the same name. And so girls do a lot of drumming. So we really have, you hear us make sure that we include the word pod or podcast at the end. And that's just for copyright reasons.
Of course. Got to adhere to that.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, health IT hit, and just the visual it creates. And why should we have a focus on women?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, so I'll say a few things. One, it came from being a road warrior. So after my entry into healthcare, I basically traveled for 3 years and got to see medical practices all over the country, from Alaska to Florida, all the corners of the US. And there's no doubt about it that women are they run a lot of these organizations. They're like the bread and butter, the engines of these of many practices. And yet I would go to conferences, and when it came to whoever was on stage, it just didn't match. In 2018 there was a conference that started, and they were really touting being like the beginning of something new. We're gonna, this is the new way that we're gonna do it. And there was a lot of money and effort and time. You could tell that so much thought went into it. And yet they became somewhat notorious for having all male panels. And so even on topics that were centered around women's health. And so on an organizational side, women don't have any issue getting jobs in an entry level or even middle management position. In fact, they make up more than 80% of the workforce in the healthcare and health IT industry, but they are less than 20% of leadership positions. And, that's the part that I like. Okay, as the primary consumers, as the primary decision makers in their home, we have a lot of insight into needs that need to be met, or for different stakeholders, whether family or going from there. And it's just not. Our voices need to be heard ultimately. And so we can speak about the pay gap and many other things, but for me that became a real passion. And I thought, you know what? if there's all these millions and potentially billions of dollars of people putting conversations together of that need to be heard, you know, there's this option now where people can have a voice without without having to do all of that. And so I just thought, well, what's my skill set and how can I be part of something that I can, you know, contribute and make a difference in the way that I want to see the world.
And for me, it was a little bit of a different take on it. I was working in a space where I was writing policy a lot, and I would see, and particularly in the pediatric sector, how these decisions, particularly with payers, would affect families and moms in particular. So I would be the one who was tasked with telling a family or moms that they weren't going to be covered when their child had a chronic condition or something that was going to cause them to either have to give up their job and stay home and take care of their child or institutionalize their child. So when I would have those conversations, I would always in the back of my mind say, why is this happening? And it has this great impact on the way women can work. So I just took it upon myself. I'm like, I'm going to do something about this. And I got tired of having those conversations. It's almost, you know, I would have anything from women who would have to travel 3 counties over to drop their child off at a facility, or the other option would be to stop working. So I'm like, this needs to change. And I kind of started working on that from that angle of women need to be able to thrive, their children need to be able to thrive, and we need to do something a little bit different here.
Absolutely. The numbers speak, right? There's a story there of the numbers and the stats, and we could sprout a lot of stats to evidence that this is a real issue that exists, right?
Exactly.
We have a lack of representation. And I love the fact you brought up policy. It's a passion of mine as well, because things start there, right? Mm-hmm. Things start there at a governance level. If we just talk about general stuff, the way we structure things, the governance we put in, and if we design better with equity in mind, it enhances things for everybody.
Exactly.
But it improves access for everybody. And one thing I want to, I don't want to be remiss here when we talk about there's a gender parity issue, but I think if you come from a Black and ethnic minority background, there's actually another layer of barrier. And, you know, I think we would be remiss if we don't mention that and we don't acknowledge that. I mean, Cherise, you know, you and I have had a dialogue about that as well previously. I mean, what's your view around that?
I think, well, a couple of things show up for me, and, you know, and I try to not to be too audacious here, but it needs to be said that most of the problems with women of color is that we're so impacted. Like, it's almost the old saying that if, you know, America gets a cold, minorities get pneumonia. And that's 100% true because it affects us in such a great way. Social determinants of health are a huge issue for women of color. We usually are the leaders in our families and our households and that type of thing. So when things affect our ability to access care and to access services and to have a voice in what's being said or the decisions that are being made about our health, it impacts us, not just ourselves, our family, and generationally. And it is very hard to recover once a system has caused, you know, a problem for your generation. It takes you 30 years to recover from that, right? So knowing that, we have to look at women of color and say, hey, if we can solve their problem, we can solve all of them.
Well, yeah. Maternal health is something that's a focus area for REACH. There's a lot of work that's going in terms of, and for those who are listening, please do go to the REACH website, have a look at the work that's being done within maternal care. But that is an area where the disparity and the stats are pretty horrifying. You know, when you talk about mothers, it just makes me think of some of that work that's being done.
Yes, definitely. You know, we know that women of color are going to more than likely, when it comes to disparities in this area, 3 times more likely to suffer an issue during pregnancy and postpartum than their white counterparts. And, you know, this is not a third world nation, so it shouldn't be that as much of a problem as it is anyway. But when you look at when it's disproportionately affecting a certain segment of the population, we really have a whole different type of epidemic here, because there's no real reason why that should be. I think when you take away the voice of a culture, or when people feel like their voices are not being heard in a space, this is where you see these disparities show up. So we know from research that women of color, when they see their doctors, they're less likely to be believed when they report a problem. Why is that? We also know that in medical school, doctors are still being taught, when we train them, they're still being taught that women of color don't experience pain to the same levels. Why is that? So those are the questions that we need to be asking, and the problems that we need to be solving, because it has such an impact on the maternal health rate and the disparity rate in this country, because we are the United States and we should not have this particular problem at this point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there are issues, they're multi-layered, there's so many elements to it. We could really go into a really different tangent right now, and I want to kind of get us back on track as well, because there is huge challenges here, and I think there's a lot to be said. And I do think stories are very powerful. So when you meet with people and you get to hear their story, it can change and shift things. And you guys have been doing something really interesting around stories. So Joy, you want to tell us a little bit about a road trip that you both recently have?
Yeah, I would be happy to. So as part of our mission to speak with women in the industry, because of COVID, and a lot of that turned into Zoom meetings and, online and virtual events. And I was experiencing isolation in 2020 and got inspired to take a road trip. And so it was something that I could do on my own with my dog. And it was something that ended up being very empowering for me. When I came back, I thought, I was taking a poll of everyone I knew, like women in particular, and even men, like, have you ever been camping by yourself? And just figuring out, because I couldn't believe like how much of an impact that had on me as far as feeling capable. And when I had experienced that, I thought, you know what, this is something that, as I think of like how you do one thing is really how you do everything. And how is it possible that you could share this experience with our community? And so I collaborate. I mean, I am somebody who thinks big and definitely outside of the box. So I had collaborated with the HIMSS organization to see if I could connect with all of their regional chapters and essentially create a safe way to meet with the women in those chapters around the country over the course of the summer. So between 60 and 90 days was the intention of like starting in California, heading over to the East Coast via the southern route, going up to the Northeast, and then back across the top. And so, it was kind of a big idea, and they were up for it. They did a great job of helping to connect me with the different regional chapters, and we made it happen. So we put a whole campaign around hitting the trails, and over 60 days, we traveled to 25 countries, met up with 60 different women. We recorded more than 20 podcast episodes that we'll be sharing with the world soon, to just really talk with people and connect with them. And it wasn't, it was all centered around hiking and going on different like hikes in nature, so that what was COVID safe. We're not going to be meeting in a happy hour or anything like that, but how can we get into nature, change our context a little bit, get out of what your bubble in a safe way, so that we could potentially not just connect with each other, connect with nature, reconnect with ourselves, and then take that inspiration back to work, hopefully. So it was a big idea, and we did it. And so now we're sitting on the other side of it, and it's sort of like, wow, I can't believe we did that. It felt really good.
And let me just interject. It was 25 states, not 25 countries. Although I'm up for 25 countries if we ever decide to do that. But it was really great. And for me, I was coming out of, or in the midst of a health crisis of my own. And one of the safe ways I could recover and rehabilitate myself was to go hiking. So it was only a most natural thing for me to get outside. And I love going on walks in nature and that type of thing. So when we got together on this idea, it was kind of like, this is great. It makes sense for us. Let's get out there and do it. And when we put the whole thing together, when we looked at it on a large scale and how we could actually bring women in this sector together, it just made sense. So we got busy on it and we made it happen.
And I'll add, there's part of it. One is just like, I am really interested in building community and changing the culture for women specifically around support, that we're not here to compete with each other. We're here to support one another. And how can my success and your success be all of our successes? And to sort of create an example of that, of like, here, let me do the work. All you got to do is show up, bring some water and, and a hat, and we're going to go walk and talk and just like get it off of our chests and maybe just brainstorm. What can we do with what we know? And, connect some of those puzzle pieces that, might otherwise not have an opportunity to connect.
I absolutely love it. The idea of just, women empowering other women, is so important. The collective experience, chiming together, and then sharing that externally. So this is a very personal experience that you both did this. But there's the stories that you've captured, which I can't wait to hear about. I can't wait to hear about it. And the idea of hiking is really cool. Being in nature, peaks and troughs, moving, the landscape, terrain is quite metaphorical for the challenge. The challenge that exists for women and the challenge of even within health IT, the mountain that's there to climb. So kind of like that. Tell us, if you can, give us a snippet of some of the stories. What was being discussed?
I have one. I think that the most difficult hike that we went on was in New Hampshire, and that was Mount Major. And it was our biggest group too. We had about 17 women with us and a couple of their significant others. It was great. But along the way, it was basically steep both ways. When people say it was like uphill both ways when they walk to school, but I mean, it was really steep going up with beautiful views at the top, but it was also very challenging going back down. And not everybody had been in the best shape. There was plenty of people that hadn't really been exercising or training for this sort of thing. And so it was certainly challenging. And there was one conversation that I had with a woman where I was asking her, and it was on the way up, what are some of the biggest adventures that you've had in your life? Just tell me a story, essentially. And she had shared that she and her husband had spontaneously bought a plane ticket to Spain and, rode their bikes around Barcelona and whatnot. But by the end of the trip, she came and she said, I changed my answer. This is the biggest adventure. This is definitely one of the biggest adventures that she'd been on. And so I learned a lot from her there's a lot of takeaways from we were together for, I think that day, it was like a 4-hour hike. And so you really get to know somebody outside of the context of their work. And she happened to share a lot. She was a new mom. She shared a lot of just her own personal experience, and those conversations specifically from that day, I feel like I've taken and I'm infusing into what's next for us. But I just loved her little snippet of this is it. This is actually one of the biggest adventures that I've been on. And I was like, oh, I'm so glad that we got to, be part of that. But I know that there were moments that she was regretting it, where she was just like, why did I say yes to this?
I think we had a couple of those moments with women, but it was fascinating to me. Everybody finished all the hikes. And so also on that same hike, we had a woman who, so how we ran the hikes was I would kind of fall back and stay towards the back for the people who are a little bit slower. And then Joy would kind of lead. And it was fascinating that time because Joyce had us on these little walkie-talkies. It was so cute. But one of the women I was walking with, who was having a little trouble keeping up and getting up Mount Major, actually had designed herself in a way. She had the little hiking poles, but she was a diabetic, and she had helped develop this device where she could function and be able to go outside and do outdoor activities, and also be able to take care of her insulin and her needs and that type of thing. She was so inspirational to me because you could tell as we were going along, she was tell you of these issues she was having, but she was totally doing it, and she was determined to get to the top. So I was looking at, because like I said, I was having my own health issues. I'm like, well, I've got no excuse not to do this, and nobody does. So I was really excited that everybody during that hike made it to the top. Nobody gave up, no matter what they said on their way, because it was very challenging for some people. And then when we got to the top, you realize that this really steep mountain that you just climbed, you also have to go back down. So she was going back down and taking her own time and that type of thing. But it just felt like we had all together had really accomplished something.
Well, it was, I remember the views from the top were just amazing.
Yeah, they were amazing.
They were, lakes
imagine.
in all direction, and it was beautiful, trees. But it was nice to see the women helping each other. So there were some women that were in better physical health, and they would slow down to make sure that that others saw the path and hold on to this tree, and it's less slippery over here. And so that metaphor of literally people just supporting one another both up and down that mountain was a really beautiful day.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. What an experience. And we're looking forward to getting on the podcast and listening to it and hearing more. You've got a final hike, right? You've got a final hike coming up?
We have one left. It is actually it's sunrise, the morning that hymns begin. So we are starting it, Vegas is going to be hot, especially in the summertime. So we are going to be hiking Red Rocks, which is just about 10 or 15 minutes away from the Las Vegas Strip. And we will be taking folks on one final hike and hopefully doing an epic TikTok dance.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Reach sponsor of Hymns 21, which is coming very soon. There's a number of great events happening through August the 9th all the way to 13th. And there's a particular lineup on August 10th on maternal health, looking at public policy roundtable, and there's going to be state officials involved. So do reach out to Reach. If you're going to be at HIMSS, connect with Reach. Reach Radio will be there interviewing tech innovators who've been submitting for the HIMSS Global Health Equity Network Challenge on maternal health. Please subscribe and please engage and go on the hike with these two wonderful women who clearly have a lot of energy and a lot of support to give you. I want to wrap up understanding what you would want to convey. I mean, you've done. I think it's just so interesting, that we know you're doing proactive things to try and bridge a gap. You're hearing directly from women what they need. One thing I want to know is, what is it that's really again and again about what women are looking for? What are they saying that they need? And then also, what would be your call to action to those listening? So whoever wants to take that.
I think the access problem for persons, particularly women from marginalized background, continues to be an issue. A lot of women, as we return to our workspaces and that type of thing, that particular segment doesn't always have the option of remote working and that type of thing. So the access problem, because we need to allow moms or health care itself to fit in seamlessly to those women's lives as well, not just people who can afford to work remotely, but to other people. So that comes up for me a lot when I talk to women. And I would encourage people to go to SaveMoms.USA to understand some of the issues we face and the importance there, but also being able to thrive even though they are from a marginalized background or they have children and that type of thing. We still don't see enough women on boards. Just this summer, I tackled an issue where an organization I worked well with that I started with are back to being all male now. And I'm like, how did that happen? So we still have a long way to go. And I think we need to continue to insist on those conversations being had. And we need to continue to work on helping all women level up.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that my takeaway is acknowledging that we can't really compartmentalize all these areas of our life, that we are all whole people, and women in particular, they can't just be, the best at work and then pretend that they're not a mom, and they're a mom and then pretend that they don't work. It just doesn't work. So I would like to see that, there's ways that we can modify our environment to just to make it easier for women in particular. And then also making sure that, and on the flip side, the other thing, like my takeaway is, don't be afraid to do hard things. Like there's a mountain to climb. Like, don't be afraid. Let's climb it. We can climb it together. And that's the part of it that I'm just like, you know what? I think that there's confidence building and community building in supporting one another to do hard things.
And it can't just be, you know, the work of women. We know we have a long way to go, but organizations and our male allies and that type of thing, they really do have to chip in and do their part. I mean, we see that during this pandemic phase, women lost a 30-year area of productivity, but in organizations saw a 10% increase in productivity due to women. We also, during the pandemic, we're doing 30% more work. So it would be incumbent upon, and the smart thing to do for organizations to say, listen, we need to make sure we make a way for women to continue to thrive, because we see they are our productive workforce. It only makes good business sense, right? So I would hope that male allies and a lot of these organizations would say, we need to do better and mean it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's how 30 minutes goes, like that, when there's so much to say. So thank you both so much. Thank you, Cherise. Thank you, Joy, for your time being with us here today. For those who are attending HIMSS 21, make sure you do connect with all these guys. Check out Reach as well if you're going to be going there, definitely. With that, I will just summarize to say that, you know, listening to one another, empathy, hearing the stories, understanding we all have a role to play, exactly as you were saying, are the really important things that need to happen. And then action speaks. If it's measured, it gets done. So let's keep an eye on the number. Let's keep an eye on what we're doing at a senior and a governance level, because if it happens at that level, it trickles down. It does need to be top down. It can't just be grassroots organizations that are left to do this work. But you both continue flying the flag, continue doing those hikes, and I hope I'll be able to join you someday. Once you do hit 25 countries, make sure the UK is one of them.
Will do. Thank you so much, Nina.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone that's logged in and or watching this on demand. Please subscribe to the Reach YouTube channel. Thank you so much.